with the Siebel program. And when we started it out, we wanted to make sure we were also working with the coaches, and the first person we thought of was Reed. And so we called him up and said, hey, would you be willing to do some work to kind of help connect with our coaches? And he's like, yep, sure, raised his hand, and it's been a brilliant partnership. And he also most recently was involved with some of the college coaches out in Utah. Not only did he actually work with them, I think he went skiing with them too, which was pretty cool. So without further ado, I'm really pleased to introduce Reed Maltbie.
Setting something down. Thank you very much. Hey everybody, yeah, like Stu said, I've been working with US Sailing since 2018 now, and one of the things I always get asked, well, at least when I was in Utah and I was out with all the college coaches, they said, do you hang out and go out with the other sports you work with? And I said, no. No offense to them, but when I'm around sailing, I just feel like these are my people. So, of course, I had fear of missing out last night because I was back at home and you all were on a pub crawl. I'm like, man, I'm missing out on the fun. So I love working with US Sailing because I know nothing about sailing, just like Rain. Absolutely nothing, and I think that's what makes it so interesting to work with you, is the stuff we talk about has nothing to do with sailing. It has nothing to do with sport. It has to do with the brain, has to do with development, has to do with human performance, and those go way beyond the sport. And yes, the title says long-term youth sport participation, but I'd really like to cross that out because what it comes down to is it's long-term activity participation. And that's what we're really going to talk about today. So if you're in here and you don't really work with youth athletes, don't worry. Actually, who works with athletes over 15 years in here, 15 years old? Who works with athletes over 25? Who works with athletes over 30? So a couple of you, those of you that had your hands up for athletes over 30, do you still work with athletes under that age range? Some? Because the brain doesn't stop developing until well into the mid-20s. I'm 46 and I'm pretty certain I haven't hit my stride in brain development yet, or at least my wife would say so. That I got some growing to do. So the brain doesn't stop developing until like into the mid-20s. So even if you're working with an athlete that's in the mid to late 20s, a lot of times their brain development isn't quite there yet. So the stuff we'll talk about, even if it says children in front of it, can still be applied. Now, if you'll do me a favor just to get you moving, because I know I'm what stands between you and a $10,000 boat ride. So I'm not kidding myself. I know most of you are here because of the boat ride, not to hear me. Totally get it. I'm here for the boat ride too. And actually, I was here for Rain's talk, so I was so glad we split. Because if you'd come to mine and we were at the same time, we would have just done a field trip and gone over and listened to Rain, just so you know. But if you'll do me a favor, if you all stand up real quickly, just stand up for me, just to get a little energy going. Now, how many of you all have an activity that you've done for an extended period of time regularly for at least a year? If you haven't done an activity for at least a year, anything, it could be painting, it could be art, it could be poetry, it could be pottery, whatever it is, running, doesn't matter, but stay standing. What about over 2 years? 3? 5? How about 10? 15? Oh, you know what? Wait, let me eliminate sailing. Sailing doesn't count? Just because I want to, because you're like me, I'm a soccer guy, so I'll play soccer the rest of my life. Okay, so a few of you now. 25, 30, 35, 40, 45. Now you're older than me, 50. Sorry, 55. Okay, boomer. Yeah, I'm just kidding. I've got a millennial daughter, I can say that. All right, so if you did an activity for more than 40 years, would one of you be willing to share what that activity is? Anybody? Yes? Photography. Why do you do it?
I love it.
You love it? What kind of photography do you do?
Mostly nature, sports, but also children.
Nature. Okay, I'm gonna go with the nature because this is a good one. So you found yourself sometimes really early in the morning in really cold, wet places trying to photograph an animal that won't sit still for you and won't follow directions, right? Yeah. Is that fun? Can be, right? So there's a famous photographer in Florida. I was at University of Florida for a couple years, and there's a guy that was a photographer down there who's famous for his alligator shots. And he's got this one where he took it at night in the swamps. Gainesville being called, you know, they say welcome to the swamp when you play at University of Florida. It's true. It's in the middle of the swamps. We moved there, we're like, this is great, we're gonna be in Florida, we got the coast. No, we got flies the size of small aircraft and alligators. That's what we had in Gainesville. Anyway, he goes into the protected nature preserve, middle of the night, hikes out into the middle of nowhere, gets on a ladder, and waits until the sun sets to snap the perfect shot. And if you've ever seen it, it is a picture of hundreds of lit up eyes all around him. So I was at a talk one time he was giving, and he explained that that picture only captured about a third of what was really in front of him. So it was hundreds upon hundreds of alligator eyes all trained on him, and he's on a ladder in the middle of the water with them. And he takes the picture. And I'm like, and you enjoy that? You still do it after that day? The reason I asked you is because photography, sometimes you put yourself in these positions that may not be comfortable, may be a little bit challenging. At the moment, it may not be fun, and yet, how long have you been doing it?
Since I was 23.
Since she was 23, so about 5 years. So, since she was 23. Where's Jen Gamara? Is she in here? Jen, she ran the mermaid run this morning. She's not in here. Did anybody else run the mermaid run from a mermaid 5K? You ran it. What's your name? Emma. Emma, did you win your age group? Did I hear that? Yeah, congratulations. I heard that. That's awesome. So let me get this straight. You're on vacation, right? You're in San Diego at a resort, and you chose to get up at 5 a.m. to go run? Really? Are you feeling okay? Did you hit your head yesterday at demo day? I asked that because when you're running, which one did you run? The 5 or? The 5. When you're running a 5K, you get about halfway through, and probably sometimes, especially after the pub crawl last night, you sort of hit a point where, I don't think I want to do this anymore, right? Yeah, but you still do it. So are you having fun in that moment?
Yeah, because you just have to get over the hump and tell yourself you're going to finish. That's what's fun.
There you go. So there's an enjoyment piece. The reason I say this is because one of the pieces of the puzzle for us participating in something for a very long time is that enjoyment, that deriving pleasure from that activity, even when sometimes it's not quite fun, even when you're standing in a swamp full of gators or laying in the water in the morning trying to take a picture of a waterfowl, right? Even when you're running mile 26 of a marathon, it may not feel good at that moment, but you enjoy doing it. And that's what we're going to talk about today, is not just for your young kids, but what are those 3 pieces of the puzzle that we can cultivate in our athletes and in ourselves so that we want to participate in things for a very long time, potentially for the rest of our lives. So the first thing that we just talked about was enjoyment. And then you talked about you like being in the process, right? And you like the idea of getting to that finish line. So there is that engagement piece there. You're totally engaged in the moment, in the process, right? And then the final piece is you're the one choosing to get up at 5 a.m., right, to go run. So my wife and I had a deal last year. I lost about 45 pounds, and the reason I lost it was because of my wife. She would get up every morning at 4:30 in the morning, shake my foot and say, honey, we're going to the Y. Every day for a year. I lost that weight. I put 10 right back on. You know what she said? You're not getting up in the morning anymore. Because that's not my choice. I'd rather sleep in. When somebody else was having me do it, I didn't want to do it. But what I discovered was I fell in love with yoga. So now my wife has become a yoga instructor, and guess who's every chance he gets asks her to do yoga with him? Because it's my choice. So that's the third piece of the puzzle, is that empowerment piece. It actually boils down to this. What we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about play, intrinsic motivation, and autonomy. And if anybody's read the psychology, if anybody's read Maslow, if anybody's looked at, even in workplaces, read the Harvard Business Review, these terms will come up all the time. Enjoyment, intrinsic motivation, and autonomy. Those are the 3 things that get people to do things, and it gets them to stay. Companies now are writing all kinds of blogs and doing all kinds of courses on how do we empower our employees so they stay employees for a long time, so they stay engaged with our company. Those are the 3 things that we'll talk about. And because I love a good story, and I don't know if I can tell them as well as Rain, I'll be telling some stories along the way. So the first piece of that puzzle is enjoyment. Play. And what we'll talk about with play is the idea of, and here's a harken back to Rain, higher brain activity. When people play, when people are doing something that activates the body and the spirit, there's actually shown in research studies higher brain activity. If you take a group of school children and put them through 20 minutes of high physical activity, and then you had magnetic resonance on their brains, and you took a control group and had them do nothing for 20 minutes, what you would find out is the difference in the brains, which I'll show you in a minute. The second piece of the puzzle is proper learning pathways. We learn through play. It is the proper learning pathway. And when we talk about it, you'll see that. The way we learn is a play process in everything we do. We like to test things out. I was telling somebody the other day, you know, when I first learned to ski, I was watching the ski videos, Warren Miller, and reading books. And they went, you were reading books to learn to ski? Exactly. You know how I really learned to ski? My buddies came back to the condo and said, dude, you've been reading books and watching ski movies for 2 days. We're going skiing. And they got me on a slope. Now, granted, they took me to the top of a slope that didn't have any greens. So we get off the ski lift. I said, all right, where's the green? I'll see you at the bottom. I said, oh, yeah, one problem. You're going to have to yard sail your way down, which means, if you know, you lose all your equipment, which I did. But that's how I learned, was through that play experience. It's that proper learning pathway. And then finally, we'll talk a little bit about state-dependent learning. If we learn in a play mode, guess what happens when we go and do that actual activity in competition? We're in the proper state. So retrieval of what we learned during the practice is better for us. So let's jump right in. The first thing you want to do with anybody you're working with is let them play. Give them that opportunity to explore and play. Now, it's a little bit easier with sailing, but the sports I teach, like soccer, they think we're going to line them up, 10 kids in a line, and each of them is going to shoot on goal. So you got 1 kid shooting and 9 kids waiting. They're not playing. And then we put 30 kids on our team and only 4 are on the field at a time. And so we've got 26 kids sitting on the bench and 4 kids playing. And these 26 are really bad. These 4 score all my goals. So they'll stay in the whole game. They'll get a minute of play. And I always tell coaches, they're not learning when they're sitting. They need to actually play. So let them play. Structure any of your activities, especially in the community outreach piece, around that play vehicle. And here's why. And I just said it earlier. The brain on the right is a brain that did 20 minutes of walking. The brain on the left is a brain that was sitting quietly for 20 minutes. You know what they're telling teachers now? Put recess back in school. I taught kindergarten for a year. And you raised a hand, so you probably know this. My principal said no recess. I said they're 5.
I give it a thumbs up.
That's, oh yeah, so you totally get it, right? And my principal said, no, they're here to learn. They're not here to play. I said, you want me to have 25 5-year-olds for 4 hours with no play? Yes, they must sit quietly at their desks and learn from you. I said, this isn't going to work out for me because I can't sit for 4 hours quietly. Well, the research is now saying if you want them to learn, get them moving, then teach them. They're actually saying that children score better on math tests after physical activity. So if they've got a hard test coming up, get them moving first, then let them take the test. So when you create these play environments for your sailors, when you create these opportunities for them to explore and play and free play within the sailing process, what you're doing is anything you teach them will be retained better because the brain is actually primed to learn. Those are the moments they will learn. Learned something interesting the other day. I was reading a blog about teaching versus learning. They learn during those movement moments. So when the clock is running, they're learning. We teach when the clock is stopped. So let them play, and then if you're going to layer something in, the brain is now primed. That's when you take a break, you pull up alongside the boat and you say, hey, what happened here? What could you do differently? What about this? They're going to retain it because you're teaching in the stoppage, and then they go and they learn it in the plane. Second piece of the puzzle is not just let them play messy. Does everybody know who Karch Karai is? He's one of the greatest volleyball players ever to play, male or female in the United States. And Karch now coaches the women's national team. And when he first got them, he said he really struggled with it because they wanted to be perfect in practice. And he said the practices were so horrible because they were too pristine, too good, too perfect. And he said he pulled them all in and said, look, that's not what I want. He said, I want you to make mistakes in practice. He says, we're not training to be good at practice. We're training to be good in the games. So if you're not willing to have ugly training, we're not going to get better. There's a whole product out there called Train Ugly for that reason. Play should be messy. How many of y'all have kids? What was it like when they learned to walk? Did they just pop up and walk across the stage, no big deal? Or did they fall a couple times, have to pull themselves up, crawl a little bit more? It's messy. But nobody ever goes, oh, wait, little Johnny. That is really, your technique is way off. Let me help you here. Stand up, all right? Hey, Susie, get in line with Johnny. We're going to do this as a group. You stand and watch him for 5 minutes, and then you'll get your chance. Nobody does that to a group of kids when they're learning to walk. We just go, oh, no, it's fine. Let him explore. He'll figure it out. Let him come to me. Don't mess with him. He'll figure it out. That's how they learn. It's messy. We knew instinctually from the day we were born that we needed to be messy to learn how to function in this world. Learning to read, messy. Learning to write, messy. Learning not to use Sharpies on the walls. Messy, right? That's how we learn. So you've got to let your athletes play messy. You've got to remind them that failure is a road sign, not a stop sign. What I mean by that is if you take on what that team was doing with Karch Karai and everything has to be perfect with your sailors, then every time they make a mistake, they think it's a dead stop. But that's not what failure is for us. Failure is that road sign that says maybe St. Louis is 30 miles away. That doesn't tell us to stop. It says keep going, you're almost there. Now, if I leave Pennsylvania and I hit the St. Louis is 30 miles away sign and I'm headed to San Diego, I'd probably say, oops, I'm going the wrong way. I need to turn, or I'm sorry, and I'm headed to New York. I say, oops, I'm going the wrong way. I need to turn and go the other way, right? So that's what that sign does. If it either tells you to change direction or it tells you to keep going. It never tells you to stop. The other piece of that puzzle is messy play leads to sticky learning. If you want them to retain, let them make mistakes. Because when you have difficult play where you make a lot of mistakes and you learn from those mistakes and you grow from those mistakes, that's when the learning actually sticks the most. How many of y'all have ever learned a difficult language? Anybody take engineering courses? It's tough, wasn't it? It's sticky and it's messy during the process, right? But then you retain those algorithms for a really long time, right? Yeah. So we need it to be messy so that it sticks for a long time. Let them play for something. This is the other piece of the puzzle that we always get wrapped up in, is every time I use the word fun or play, I've got somebody who goes,
But Reed, then we're not teaching our children to be winners, and you're just creating snowflakes.
That's a phrase like, okay, boomer, I'd like to remove from our vocabulary. Maybe remove millennial too, because that doesn't work for us either. Yeah, no, we're not at all creating snowflakes. We're teaching them what competition is versus comparison, but we're teaching them to compete. We all have to play for something. Again, when you hit the last mile of your run and you feel awful, especially after last night's pub crawl, you said what? You kept running because why? There was a... There was a finish line. Yeah. So we need to play for something. Sailing, there is a purpose in it, whatever that purpose is. It can be an ethereal purpose. Like when I learned to sail a couple months ago, it was nothing about getting to a finish line. It was about becoming, I kid you not, it was a Zen moment. Chris Childers got me out on the water and he had me close my eyes. And he said, okay, I want you to, first I was sailing to a point. And I found this little point way off in the distance that wouldn't move, and I put it between one of the lines and the sail, and I had it, and I was like, this is great. And he said, now I want you to close your eyes. He says, and I want you to move the boat. And I want you to feel, or I want you to know when the sail goes slack and when the sail snaps. And I want you to tell me what it feels like. What do you hear? It was the most amazing moment, 46 years old. And I told my wife and children, I said, all of a sudden, I could hear the sail, and then I could feel the boat be pulled out away from me towards the point that was in my head. And then the water went from slapping against the side of the boat and being kind of noisy and messy to all of a sudden I could just feel it grooving along the sides of the boat, like I was in that groove. The next time I go sailing, that's what I'm searching for. That's what I'll be playing for. That's something, that feeling again. And the reason we want to let people play for something is because play is the highest form of research. Albert Einstein said that. We want them to have things to go for because that's what the lab is. When we play, we're in the lab. We're working together. But they've got to have a goal to get there. They've got to have some kind of finish line. When we were down in the coaching forum, I told them, I said, you want to set goals, but really you want to teach them to have habits along the way. It keeps them coming back each time. So when you have them play, make sure they play. Make sure they play messy. And make sure you give them something to attain. With the little ones, it's small steps. Today, all we want to do is accomplish this. When I coached soccer with the really little ones, we always had just one goal game. It was the commander's intent. Today, all I want us to do is be able to do blah. And they all played for that one thing. And then guess what? A year later, maybe I can layer in two. Today, we have two pieces we want to play for, but we always played each game for something. It wasn't about winning. It was something we embedded in there that I knew would make them better people and better players, but they had something to play for because humans need a why. The second biggest piece of participation is engagement. And engagement is all about intrinsic motivation. If you want people to be engaged, they have to be excited to do it themselves. They have to be motivated. There has to be something inside of them. If they're always motivated by the person at 4:30 in the morning shaking their foot, then they're going to be like me. They're going to crash out of that. But if they get motivated by something that matters to them intrinsically, they'll keep going. I love Eastern philosophy. I took a bunch of courses on it in college. I've read all the books. One of my favorite books was Csikszentmihalyi, Finding Flow by Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. Timothy Galway's Inner Game of Tennis. These are people that are tapping into Eastern philosophy and Zen Buddhism and bringing it into sports. Amy Saltzman, who does a Still Quiet Place, has a book called A Still Quiet Place, all about finding flow. That's my jam. So when my wife started doing yoga, I'm like, oh my gosh, you're speaking my language. I'm a hippy dippy Southern California avocado eating yoga dude, right? It's intrinsic, so I'll get up for that. Like, I just want to be able to brag to my Ohio friends, like, yeah, I eat avocados now. What you doing in the Midwest? When you intrinsically motivate people, and we'll talk, when you're engaging with people, I should say, and this is where Rain comes in, when you're creating connection with people, he used the phrase neural coupling, and I went, well, shoot, I don't even have to present this afternoon. He's got it. It's exactly it. It's brain syncing. When you tell stories, when you engage, when you connect with your athletes, even just making eye contact, you're syncing your brains. As we talk right now, I kid you not, as we talk right now, everything that's coming out of my mouth, because you're all looking up here, our brain waves are starting to sync up. If I say something that resonates with you, they could actually show that our brain patterns would look very similar. The wave patterns of our brains, because your brain is deciding whether you should believe me, whether it's cocktail hour yet and this guy needs to shut up, or whether, oh, I don't believe him, I'm going to keep listening so I can disprove him. Either way, we're syncing here. The second piece of the puzzle is belonging through striving. This is a big one. We just talked about that, something to play for, that competition piece. We'll go deeper into that. How do we engage our sailors in a competitive environment? We'll talk about that belonging through striving. But as was said this morning by Rain, that's deep down with Maslow. We all want to belong, sense of safety and security. And we all strive and thrive throughout our lives. It's the hero's journey. It's why all those movies resonate. And if you read Shakespeare and then you watch every modern movie made today, they follow the same formula Shakespeare used. Most of them are just mimicking what Shakespeare captured, or what some of the famous Greek writers captured, right? And the Roman writers captured. Like, we've been doing this for a long time. Striving. And then finally, there's neural triggers that happen. When we engage people, we will actually trigger in the neural pathways, again, that learning and that intrinsic motivation. So let's jump into what we can do. The first one is connection before correction. It's one of the things we use in our tool cards for coaches. We always tell them, if you want to correct your athletes, if you want to engage with athletes, if you want your athletes to receive feedback, connect with them. Because as Wooden and others have said, they don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So when we want to really get to our athletes, we have to connect with them in some way. It's through storytelling. It's through sharing and being vulnerable with your own life. There is nothing better than telling your sailors a story of when you were in their shoes, or telling them a story of what it was like. I mean, Chris here, he's talking to me and he's telling me about his sailing experiences. You don't think I'm going, this is really cool. I want to be there. And then he says the greatest story ever told to me. We're in Coral Reef Bay, and he says, Reed, you're sailing where pirates and Jimmy Buffett have sailed. I'm a huge Jimmy Buffett fan. I was totally in and engaged at that point. I was totally connected to the experience. So we always tell our coaches, high fives change lives. That physical contact matters. Going back to Rain's talk this morning, I had it in mind, oxytocin. There's research out there that actually shows that the skin's an organ, and it's got receptors. And those are receptors that trigger when we make contact with people, we're releasing oxytocin in their brains, in their bodies. They've shown that children who get high fives or fist bumps or some kind of contact from their teachers before class are 3 times more likely to raise their hands and ask questions in class. You've seen all the viral videos. Those kids feel like they belong somewhere. And not only do they feel like they belong when they're given their own high five as they enter the room, now they have the confidence and trust in that educator to engage in the learning process. They don't sit in the back of the room. They actually want to, I'm just teasing you all. They actually want to engage in the process with them. This is key. We make contact with people. We connect with people. We're drawing them in and we're engaging their intrinsic motivation to want to be there. Right before I came on stage, somebody gave me a high five. I was nervous because I knew I'd have a room full of people who were had had an awesome week of learning, and I had to wrap it up with what I was doing. I'm like, man, I can't beat everything that's happened already this week. But I got that high five and I was fully engaged in the moment. We can do this. All from that high five. Compete, don't compare. That's the other piece of the puzzle here. We want to teach our sailors to compete, but we don't want them to compare. Comparison, and I didn't come up with this quote, it's out there, comparison is the thief of joy. Comparison stalls progress. If I stop to compare myself to people around me, I've stopped moving forward. It's that Winston Churchill saying, if you stop to throw stones at every dog that barks at you, you'll never get anywhere. I mean, it's that idea. Every time I stop and compare at somebody, I'm not moving forward myself. And comparison is really just, it's a falsehood for us. It's a dangerous, dangerous thing. There's research out there that actually shows that the need to compare in human beings is as strong as the drive for the hunger drive. Like, we want to compare so badly with the people around us as much as we want to eat. You think I'm kidding? How many of y'all have teenagers? How many of y'all coach teenagers? How many of y'all watch your teenagers with the cell phones attached to their hands, checking Instagram and Facebook and Snapchat and Snap Twitter and Twitter chat and whatever else, right? They're liking, and I mean, they get upset if, are you kidding me? I liked 3 of Mike's picks and he didn't like my pick. What a jerk. Man, they are comparing everything. Mike's got 59 followers. I only have 50. My son keeps telling me that. So-and-so has 59 followers. I only have 50. I'm like, you're comparing to him. Who cares? Here's the problem with comparison. It turns allies into enemies. It's a falsehood because we have no idea what else they've brought to the table to get to where they are. I could look at other people and the successes they've had in their careers and I'd be, man, I wish I was like so-and-so. But I have no idea the amount of struggle, the amount of work, the amount of skills built to get to where they are. All I know is what I can do to be there. When Katie Ledecky was young and knew that she had a shot at being an Olympic level swimmer, she said she decided she would know the time she needed to swim at every age to stay relevant and the Olympic dream. Not how she was doing against the people around her, but the times that she needed to be swimming at because that was something she could control. She can't control the speed of the water. Sometimes pools are fast, sometimes they're slow. She couldn't control where her body was in the training. Sometimes we burn out and we overtrain a little bit much, we don't perform well. She couldn't control the athletes around them who would just have a race of their lifetime. Those are uncontrollables. What she can control is the race she swims. So we need to take the comparison out. We need to get them to start thinking about competing. Because everybody can compete. I can show up and do my very best every day to be a little bit better than the person I was tomorrow. I don't have to worry about what the people around me are doing. Not only that, again, so we did this in the coaching class. Everybody hold your hand up. Put your thumb out in front of you, like this. Okay, and we did this in the coaching form, but I'm gonna use it a little bit differently. I want you to look right at your thumb, and I want you to focus right just on the nail of your thumb. Now, when we're reading or anything else like that, this is all we see is just that thumbnail, and everything around it sort of just melts away and becomes nothing. We don't see the other things that are happening. All we're focused on is that thumb. That is comparison in our world. When we start saying, well, so-and-so's got this, and so-and-so does this, and so-and-so is this, all we're seeing is that thumbnail. We're not seeing the whole picture. It's just not worth the comparison. Get your athletes to think about compete at all times, not win at all costs. Compete at all times. They can control that. They can control their intentions. They can control how they show up. They can control how they compete each day. They cannot worry about what the people around them are doing unless they're in the boat together or on the same team. But let me tell you this, and I would tell coaches this all the time, and finally, after a few years, when the results started coming in, they went, aha, here's the thing. If I've got a team of kids and all I do is focus on my 3 best, and I keep comparing the rest of the athletes to my 3 best, and I keep telling those athletes that they're being compared to those 3 best, they're going to leave me, and they're never going to think they're going to get there. Because our mind is our own worst enemy, and it will find the negative in everything. So if I start comparing to the people who are better than me, I will find a reason to say, they're better because of this. They're better because of that. I lack this. I lack that. Like Rain said, if I'm sitting in the back of the room going, wow, that guy's so much better a storyteller than me, And he's got pictures and videos. Dang, I should have done a picture of me when I was 5. I got one from playing soccer. Darn it! I wouldn't be up on this stage. That comparison really does rob us, okay? We need them to start thinking about competing at all times. They can control how they compete. They can control what they bring to the table. Children, you can say adults, you can say everybody. We all love a good challenge. This is the other piece of engagement. You want to engage them? Challenge them. There's educational research out there by Vygotsky on the zone of proximal development that says that you need to put learners in this zone where they're not under-challenged so they're bored, but they're not over-challenged so they burn out. But they need to be in this place where they're being pushed and pulled together in this challenge. We need to do that with our sailors. We need to put them in challenging situations that stretch them out of their comfort zone, that excite them. Everybody loves a challenge. Everybody loves a puzzle. So we need to start thinking about how we challenge our athletes. I said challenge children, but it's just challenge people with show me's and who cans. Here's the thing about challenging people. There's research out there that says that the aha moment brings joy, brings creativity, brings relief, and actually releases dopamine. Again, remember that cocktail, right? So we've got oxytocin and we've got dopamine covered. When you challenge people and they struggle with a puzzle, but you support them enough that at some point in time they're going to get there. And by the way, if you're a fan of peer-assisted learning, that is one of the best ways to help. You got a sailor that's struggling a little bit and they're almost there. Don't you as the adult step in and do it for them. Keep them trying, but maybe pair them with somebody who does do that skill pretty well and let them peer assist, because they learn better when they learn from a peer, believe it or not. And to teach once is to learn twice. So if you put an athlete with another one, the one that's teaching also learns it again. You're just strengthening the skill set in that one. So peer assisted learning. But challenge people, put them in those situations, get them to that point, assist them. But when they succeed, that aha moment releases dopamine. Here's the beautiful part. When somebody is challenged and learns something, they retain it longer. It leads into long-term memory and long-term learning retention. So the challenge actually makes us better at what we do. Empowerment, this is the last piece. And then we can find out who wins that $10,000 boat ride. Empowerment. We think, I did for a long time, listen, everything, and when I talk about some of the negatives in coaching, don't think I didn't do them. I started coaching when I was 16. Can you imagine what disaster I was at 16 years old coaching kids? Whew. Can you imagine what kind of disaster I was at 40 coaching kids? Still there, still learning. So I've made these same mistakes, which is why we can talk about this. We think as coaches that our job is to teach them everything. No, you're doing it wrong, let me show you. That we are these fonts of knowledge, and we'll just pour our knowledge into them and they will be great. It's just not the case. It's not how we did it. People perform better and want to stay longer when they feel empowered, when it is their experience, when we shift that locus of control out into them. The first thing about empowerment, which we'll talk about, is the dinner party guest. Before we get to that part, have any of you ever been to a dinner party where there was somebody there that you got in the car afterward and you're like, man, I really like that Joe. Wow, he is the nicest guy. Man, I'll tell you what, Karen is the best. I'm using Karen because my daughter uses Karen in a negative way, and I'm going to bring Karen back to positive. There's some term. Have you all heard that, the term? My daughter will be like, oh, I was in line behind a Karen today. Ooh, Karen. I'm like, do you know how many poor Karens you're just insulting? Like, thank goodness my wife's name is Amy. Gosh. So, but when you leave the party and you're like, oh man, I really liked Karen. She, usually that person is the person that asks the most questions. They're the most engaged. Oh, what'd you like about Karen? She was so engaging. Think about it. The dinner party guest who asks you more questions, you will like more. Why? Because they're getting you to talk about you. They're asking you questions about you. They're letting you have a voice. They're letting you tell the story. Nobody wants to live somebody else's story. You don't want to live my story. I'd much rather be down there interacting with you. Empowerment, autonomy, the dinner party effect is about letting them tell their story. And when athletes get a chance to create and tell their own stories in sports, they make it a lifelong story. You probably have myriad stories about your photography, right? And the thing that you love most about it is every time you have a new story, right? I can just imagine that Mr. Alligator guy who I was like, are you nuts? That's his favorite story to tell. Do you have a couple like that? Yes. And you love telling them because that's your story. And that's probably one of the things that sometimes gets you up at 4 a.m. to go photograph something that's very rare, right? Yeah. It's the power of your own story. The second piece of the puzzle is that internal locus of control. When we give people autonomy, what we're doing is we're giving the control to them. You want to lose athletes? The fastest way to lose athletes is to always be the one in control. Because when they don't feel like they have any power or say over what's happening to them, the locus of control moves external of them, and the easiest thing for them to choose is to quit. And do you know what the biggest competitor to sports is? Video games. Do you know why video games succeed? You get a car and you get a car. Do you know why video games succeed? Because the video game manufacturers realized a very long time ago that they would structure the video games around what the gamers wanted. I kid you not, it creeped me out, but my kid, when he was 10, came to me and said, did you know the video game manufacturers send me messages in the games and emails asking me what I want in the game? I'm like, that's creepy. They have that kind of access to my kid. But they were telling the video game manufacturers what they wanted, and they were creating the experience that the gamers wanted. We in sports decide what the athletes need, and we create an experience that we want for them. That's why we're losing them, because the locus of control is moved. And if you think I'm crazy, how many of y'all have ever seen Minecraft? Okay, I don't know about you, I'm going to date myself here a little bit, but I remember playing Pong, okay? I remember when blocky, pixelated, slow-moving, objects were how we played video games. And I can remember the day when I actually had a video game that rendered smoothly with no pixelation, and the thing didn't hop across the screen, but actually moved smoothly and didn't just go, but actually walked. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the coolest video game ever. And then my son comes in and says, oh, Dad, I'm playing the coolest video game you've ever seen. This was like 4 or 5 years ago. You gotta see this, it's awesome, it's the greatest game ever. And he shows it to me, and I was like, are you kidding? How much did you pay for that? Like a 5-year-old made that. It's blocky and it's pixelated, and sometimes he goes through the wall and you can see his hand on the other side of the wall, and you're like, no, that's faulty programming. Oh my gosh. Dad, I paid $95 for this. No, I'm just kidding. Like, seriously. But the video game manufacturer, the one that made Minecraft, that's what the kids wanted. And when the kids asked for more pixelation, he gave it. And when the kids asked for being able to make fire, he gave it. Make fire, really? Make fire, that's what you want. We want more wood. Wood? You want more wood in your video game. Really? The video game manufacturers beat us because they figured out if they created an internal locus of control, the kids would flock to them. But if you saw the VR stuff, we're coming back. We're coming back. We can create the sailing experience and give them what they want, and wow, what a way to do it, right? Get them doing VR before they've ever set foot on the water, and it eases some of the fears. But I'll tell you what, if the Steeble team had done that with me, I'd have gotten out on the water much sooner. It took me a long time to get out on the water because I'm like, you want me to what? In the bay? With sharks? Mm-mm. No, I'm good. I'm a landlubber. But give me another one of those stormy nights. The last piece of the puzzle is educare and autonomy. Educare, we don't pour anything into our athletes. The root word for education is educare, which is Latin for to draw forth. Our job is to draw not really draw the knowledge, but draw the process of acquiring knowledge out of our athletes. If we create an environment where we're drawing forth, it sticks longer, and they want to be there. So let's jump into it. How do we do that? More voice. Give your athletes more voice, plain and simple, like the dinner party guest. It doesn't have to be a whole lot, but you have to think about those times when you can let them talk. Let them control the conversation. Let them have a say. There's research done by Harvard, done by Stanford, done by MIT. There's research all over the place. Harvard Business Review every week posts an article about employees who have a say, employees who have a voice are much more engaged with their companies and feel much more empowered by their employers. It's just known. Let them have a voice. There's a couple reasons. One, because they do feel more empowered. Two, it actually replicates itself. It's reciprocal. If I give my athletes an opportunity to have a say, if I give my athletes an opportunity to have a voice, Siebel Sailing, they wanted one of the values, and we worked through these values for a couple of days, and we continue to tweak them as we go to make sure they really fit what we want for this program. One of their values is owner's voice. They wanted their children that were in the sailing programs to be able to have the guts to speak up. They inspired me so that my word of the year is actually profoundly outspoken, is my phrase. I'm going to be profoundly outspoken. I have things I want to say. I have a story to tell. I'm not going to let anybody else tell my story. I'm going to tell my story, and I'm going to have the confidence to do it. That's what Siebel wanted. They wanted those kids to be able to speak up when they saw something that maybe was dangerous, to say when they wanted to learn something, to basically have that owner's voice, because they figured if they had a voice, they would take ownership of the experience. And when you take ownership of the experience, it's yours. So give them more voice. There's another reason why. It changes our perspective. It builds community, and then it changes our perspective. Let me tell you a quick story. I was coaching, I think it was 12-year-old boys at the time. And I had this kid, he was a phenomenal goal scorer. And we're playing this game, and this kid, he could dribble 3, 4 people, tuck it in the back of the net every time, right? So we're playing this game, and first 10 minutes of the game, he takes like 4 or 5 shots, all from, 30 yards away, which for an 11, 12-year-old is really long. And of course, he doesn't score them. They basically either go way out of bounds or they dribble to the keeper. And I'm watching it. Now, I had a rule with my athletes. I would never yell at them for taking a shot. I was a striker. I was a goal scorer myself. So I would never fault them for taking risks, as long as they had a reason. I'll never fault you for trying something as long as you have a reason. And of course, in sailing, it has to be within safety parameters and all of that. But I'll never fault you for trying something. So I waited until it was sub time, and I subbed them out, and I said, hey, so-and-so, can you explain to me the thought process of why you're shooting from so far away? I didn't say, why'd you do that? Because that would shut the conversation down. But explain to me, talk to me here, what's going on? He says, Coach, I don't know if you can see it, but the keeper, every time I get the ball, because he knows that I like to dribble through, is cheating up. And he said, one of these times, I'm going to catch him off guard. I'm going to get it over his head. Different perspective. I didn't see it from the sideline, but he's 11, 12 years old. Can I fault the kid for thinking like that? Like, what brilliant, if he's thinking like that at 12, what's he going to do when he's 20? Hassan, next time you get in the game, do it again. Now, what if you do that enough that the keeper starts to go back? Could you play a ball through to Sammy? Oh, Coach, we're on to something. He goes in. I kid you not. We scored 2 goals that half. One was he chipped the keeper, and guess what? The next time he came down the field, the keeper was glued to the goal line, and he slots a ball through to Sammy. And when Sammy gets it at like 12 yards from the goal, he literally stops because the keeper just stands there. And he's like, oh, man, fish in a barrel, I'm telling you. Sorry, PETA, fish in a barrel, right? He gave me a completely different perspective. I didn't care about the goals, but man, the learning that day was really cool. Give him more voice. Or as the Dalai Lama says, when you talk, you're only repeating what you know. If you listen, you may learn something new. I've been coaching since I was 16. I've been coming to these for quite a few years. And I said it earlier, that one of the reasons why I was so excited to be here was to learn from other people. You don't think I don't learn? Oh my goodness. I go on to the next conference with everything I've stolen from you all. I give credit, but I go on to the next conference with everything I've stolen because you're teaching me something new. My kids were teaching me something new. I never thought about the idea of testing a keeper every once in a while to make sure he or she was honest and stayed back so that I could create space to play in front of him or her. Whoa, I played the game for 20-some years. I coached it for another 20-some, and I'd never thought of that. But a 12-year-old did. Because I was willing to, because my mentor was this way and taught me, I was willing to shut up and listen to him. Next piece, give them more choice. More voice, then more choice. Let them have choices. Do you want to do this or that today? With the really young ones or with the ones that can't focus, just give them limited choices. But choice is choice. When somebody has a choice, it changes everything for them. Would you rather do A or B? My kids hate vegetables. So when we would say we're having vegetables for dinner, they would cry and complain and this and that and the other. So then we started going, would you rather have mushrooms or broccoli? Guess what? They were eating the broccoli because the other choice is mushrooms, and they hate mushrooms. I gave them a choice. They felt empowered. They'll never eat broccoli again. But people want a choice. They want to say. Don't be afraid to give your sailors those opportunities to have a choice, okay? Because the greatest power a person possesses is that power to choose. That's the only thing we got in the end, is our ability to choose. If you want to shift the internal locus of, or the external locus control internally quickly, give them a choice. It goes from coach is running the show to this is my experience and coach is just my navigator. And that is the best feeling in the world when you realize that they're running things and you're just making sure they get the support they need to get it done. Oh my gosh, it changes your coaching too. It really is an awesome way to coach when they have that choice. And finally, more questions. More questions. I couldn't find out something that rhymes. More invoices, more choice, more voice, more invoice. No, so I couldn't rhyme it with choice and voice, sorry. More questions. It's a Socratic method. It's been around forever. People love to answer questions. I can stand here and give you information and that doesn't help. But if I say, who has, all of a sudden you want to answer it. Who has an activity they've done for at least a year? And everybody's like, I'm standing up, right? You want to answer it. If I just started talking about activities make you create enjoyment and engagement, fine. But it's the moment I ask you questions, your brain turns on and it starts moving. And it's like, I want to answer this. I don't even know what the question is. I want to answer it. All marketing has it. Wouldn't you want a life where you could live on the water 24/7? Wouldn't you want to be able to take your boat out anytime you want and a valet who would park it for you when you came home? Wouldn't you want the dark and stormy waiting when you got off the boat? Wow, for $6.5 million, you can have that shack on the beach in La Jolla. They had you at first. You're like, yeah, I want that. See, the marketers know that. Ask people questions, and they're like, oh, you were saying what? And then they wait, right? They get you really drawn in, and then the punchline is, that'll be $6.5 million in cash. Ask more questions of people. Right? Asking questions, I always tell my coaches, ask, don't tell. Asking questions just really creates that relationship with people where they start to learn how to create their own knowledge. I'll give you an example. So, if you always gave the answers to your athletes, this happened in Utah. I was out there with the college coaches, and we got lucky. We got to tour the U.S. ski and snowboard facility. And at one point, one of the college coaches said, "How long between conversations with the athletes do you have?" 2 minutes, 3 minutes? They laughed and said, maybe 90 seconds. Oh, so an athlete does a run, and 90 seconds later, you get to have a conversation. Yes. Okay. Why? How long do you have? Could be 20 minutes. Think about this. If you're always giving your athletes the answers and fixing things for them and never asking them questions and creating these analytical, independent problem solvers, and they begin a meltdown, you got 20 minutes till you can help them. Skiing, they only got 90 seconds. Soccer, I had whenever I could get the kid to run by me, right? Wouldn't it be better if you were asking so many questions of your sailors that they were starting to solve problems on their own, so that if you saw them out in a race and you couldn't get to them, they would figure out how to solve it calmly rather than needing to look to you to support them? Ask, don't tell. Like, that was eye-opening because it had never occurred to me. I'm not a sailor. And when they said that, I went, oh my goodness. Like other sports, it's so easy. Golfer starts to melt down. The caddy steps up alongside him and goes, hey, Greg, you need to chat about this for a minute? Greg says, no, I'm going to go take a 10 on the back of Augusta here. Don't worry about it, if you remember the famous shark meltdown, right? But they have that opportunity to have that conversation. Basketball, he's got an opportunity to bring him over. She's got an opportunity to bring her over. Volleyball, got an opportunity. Volleyball, between each point, the job of the coaches, and this goes back to that touch component, the job of the coaches is to get all the athletes back together in a circle and give a high five. Most volleyball players do it. You know why? They're recentering the person that made the mistake. Eye contact, high five, we're in this together, we're good. That human touch releases the oxytocin, trust, safety, right? I'm good. I can go back out and play. No problem. But your sailors are on the water for 18 more minutes, 19 more minutes, and they're starting to melt down. Oh my gosh, how do I fix this? If you're asking more questions during practices, they're learning to solve them themselves. New Zealand All Blacks used to train in a way that the coaches would yell at them and yell the answers at them. And the players were choking in games. Well, they have psychologists on staff, and they asked the psychologists, what are we doing wrong? And the psychologist said, back to that state-dependent learning, right? Psychologist said, well, they're learning one way and they're playing another way. What do you mean? Well, you're screaming at them in practice, so you're already getting them to the point where the adrenaline is too high. If you know the Yerkes-Dodson law, at some point in time, anxiety gets to here and performance goes with it. But then anxiety gets to be too much and performance drops. You're getting them to that drop point in practice. They get in a game, what they understand is how to choke. You've taught them how to choke. You also give them the answers. They get in a game, they can't turn to you for the answers because they're 100 yards away. So they started training them in these environments where they would put them in high pressure situations, situations they may never see in a game, but were really difficult and challenging, right? And then they would ask questions. That's what they do at New Zealand All Blacks. If you've ever watched the documentary, there are a couple times he gets on them, but most of the time he's like, what were you thinking? What were you doing? What happens now? Where's our wing back go? Should we scrum there? He's asking questions because he wants them to start thinking like that. So they asked Richie McCall. They also gave him grounding mechanisms, but they asked Richie McCall, how did it work? Richie McCall, one of the greatest rugby players of all time, was the captain of New Zealand, took them through their golden era of the modern day of rugby. He said, when we got in games, there wasn't anything we hadn't faced in practice because we tried every scenario there was. You can set up the scenarios for them in training before they get to competition. You can set up the scenarios for your community sailors in VR or on the docks before they ever get to the water. And then they asked us so many questions that they got us into a thinking mindset that when something happened, instead of panicking and going, and going redhead, we would start going, what do I do now? What can I do? How can I solve this problem? So much better. I'm going to skip around to something. Have you all ever heard of redhead, bluehead? Oh, there's a doctor out there by the name of Siegel talks about this, the lizard brain. It was called the squirrel brain by Seth Godin. Rain brought that up this morning. Called the lizard brain. It's the amygdala, right? It's what controls our primal emotions, our fear and anxiety, fight, flight, or freeze, right? When athletes, people, anything. Our brain is built in a way that this is the brain stem, this is the amygdala, okay? And then what you have is you have the other lobes, processing, logic, moral values, all of the other lobes sort of wrap over it like this, which means that logic, the frontal cortex, is controlling everything. So are our values, moral values, and all those other pieces of the puzzle. This is when we're calm, this is what the brain looks like. You put an athlete in a situation where they may start to lose it, and then you yell at them, what are you thinking? Guess who's in charge? You ever had an athlete like that? And if you're like that, and they're like that, you got two lizard brains squaring off, nothing's getting accomplished. I've got two teenagers, trust me, there's a lot of lizards running around our house these days. Hey, son, did you do the dishes? Oh my gosh, leave me alone, Dad. Working my best, right? Lizard brain. And if I turn around and go, don't you ever talk to me, lizard brain, I'll be like, hey, bud, I see something's bothering you. I'm gonna knock you upside the head, but hey, what's going on? Come here, get closer. No, but I have actually had to learn to go, okay, wait, I know it sounds crazy, but I'm gonna turn to him and say, hey, I see you're a little upset. Do you wanna take a breather for a minute and then we can have a chat? My wife's like, wow, you're gutsy. I don't know if that's gonna work. She's better at it than me, that's why. But that's the lizard brain. So when those athletes got in those high stress situations, that's what happens. But Richie McCall said that never happened because they were used to being asked questions and used to answering themselves. So instead of turning to coach and go, what do we do now, coach? Richie said, I just ground my feet at a timeout. He said something. Nobody knows what he says, but you can see him mouth it, and he brought himself back to center. He rooted himself back in the moment. He brought the lizard brain down and wrapped logic back around it and said, I can solve this because coach has trusted me to solve it in practice. He believes in me, and he's asked me enough questions that I have the confidence to do that. That's what asking questions does for people. When you ask and don't tell in situations, you're showing them you have confidence in them, you're giving them that confidence, you're creating that analytical mindset, and you're helping them manage the lizard brain. And whether they're 2 or 42 or 46 like me, because I do it too, everything we do is run by emotion. We see the actions, and we think, that's that person. That's the tip of the iceberg. Thoughts and feelings and behavior and beliefs and decisions that happen in here are what cause the behavior. So when we work with really young ones with our cards, we tell them, before you punish the behavior, understand the emotion that caused it. Because if you can teach that athlete to manage that emotion, the behaviors will naturally go away. If all you do is punish the behavior, you're just negatively reinforcing that behavior for the future because you've never addressed the emotion. For our sailors, it's sometimes situations could be extremely dangerous. So if we can help them manage their emotions by asking more questions of them, giving more choice and voice, then when they get in those situations where it could be dangerous, the lizard brain stays calm, the emotions stay in check, and they make decisions that have positive outcomes. That's the big key. Ask, don't tell. So those are the three pieces of the puzzle for you. And anything you do in your life, remember I said, hey, sailing doesn't count? It's because I knew every single one of you have been sailing for a very long time and you love what you do. One, you enjoy it. Two, it's yours. You're fully engaged in it. You love the process. You love being out there. I hear people talk, I love a good rainy day when it's blowing. Man, when it's blowing, I love being out there. You love that, all right? And it's yours. You've owned the experience your entire lives. And that's all we can ask for our athletes, is that they enjoy doing it, that they want to do it for the rest of their lives. That they're so fully in and engaged in it that they want to teach other people to do it too. That Siebel team, they couldn't wait to get me on the water. They wanted to share this zen with me. And now that they got me out there, I'm over there looking at boats going, hey, how much is in our bank? $5? Not enough. So give us a couple months. I'm figuring out how I can get my boys out on the water to be a part of it too, because it's my experience now. That one moment in Coral Reef Bay with my eyes closed, and I felt the boat pull out from under me. And I heard the water soften against the side of it. And I was sailing right alongside some rum-swilling pirate and margarita-swilling Jimmy Buffett. That's my experience. That's my story with sailing. And that's why I hope I keep my promise that I'm now a sailor for life. Thank you. Thanks, Sarah.
Pretty awesome. Thank you, Reed. Always love hearing you speak.